Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you here today in our joint workshop to discuss how to more effectively link social sciences and humanities with science, engineering, technology, and math, and how to find better ways to fund it. So it's a first joint event co-organized together by two associations. So it's CESAER and UNICA. So I would like to invite Luciano, President of UNICA, and David Bochmert, Secretary General of CESAER, to say a few words and to welcome you here today.
So thank you very much, Indre. Good morning to everyone. A very warm welcome from me, Luciano Saso. I'm the president of UNICA. This is, as Indre said, is the first collaboration between CESAER and UNICA. And I'm very happy about that because we have some members in common and we have many interests in common. So the topic of this webinar today is really very, very interesting. I want to thank very much David Bomer, the Secretary General of CESAER, for having started this collaboration with me a few months ago during the lockdown I think in May. We started to talk about it, and I'm very excited that finally we managed to organize this event today. We are looking forward to excellent sessions. One about improving funding for inter and transdisciplinary research, and the second one will be a panel, even more practical, because we will develop recommendations jointly for funders on how to better support inter and transdisciplinary collaboration through EU funding instruments. And I want to thank very much all the contributors from CESAER for this event, and of course all the contributors from UNICA, especially Jonathan Seckel, the Vice Principal of University of Edinburgh, Jens Kreisel, Vice Rector for Research of University of Luxembourg, François Boussy, Vice Rector for Research and International Relations of the University of Lausanne. Unfortunately, he cannot be with us today because of another important engagement, but the joint presentation will be made by Iago OTERO, coordinator of the Interdisciplinary Center for Mountain Research. And I want to thank also very much Mariam Hansson-Edalat, Head of Office for Research, Engagement and Innovation Services of Stockholm University. And last but not least, Aliyah, Morgenstern, Professor of Sorbonne Nouvelle University. And I want to thank also very much the UNICA office, Victoria Tsonka and Laura Colò, who worked very well with Indre for the organization of this event. I wish all of you a very successful and very pleasant webinar.
A very good morning also from my side. David Bomer, Secretary General of CESAER. Thank you, Luciano, and for your warm words. Indeed, we unite 53 universities from 26 country universities with a strong S&T profile. And in the context of our biannual work plan, we are exploring the contribution of our members to ecological, economic, and social sustainability. When talking to you, Luciano, we discovered that we share a same interest in linking the social sciences and humanities with science, technology, engineering, and mathematics as probably a key mechanism to contribute effectively to solving the grand challenges of our time. We are indeed also very excited about this first in-depth collaboration between the two organizations, and I join you, Luciano, in thanking all the colleagues from UNICA and from CESAER who made this possible here today. I had the pleasure of viewing the 3 videos and get even more excited as we also had a preparatory meeting, and we might aim at publishing an open letter together with the two organizations on providing concrete recommendations on how funders of research actually can better provide funding for inter and transdisciplinary projects. So very much looking forward to this discussion and the follow-up with you. Thank you so much. Back to you, Indre.
Thank you so much for the nice introduction. And before we hand over the microphone to our moderator for the first part, Henrik, I would like to invite Vicky, who is responsible for all the technical aspects of our webinar today, just to introduce shortly the instructions, how we will communicate today and how we will be able to interact with each other. Please, Vicky.
Many thanks. I'd like to also welcome you all. I will be very quick and brief. So you can write your questions in the chat as well, but you can also raise your virtual hand and during the discussion part, and we will give you the floor and you can explain your question to the speaker. If you write your question in the chat, then first we kindly invite you to write your affiliation as well. And also please don't forget to mention the name of the speaker if you dedicate your question to one particular person and not just in general. Also, we'd like to kindly remind you that the event will be entirely recorded and it will be made available on the CESAER and UNICA websites and YouTube channels. So later you will have access to it as well. And after the event, we will share an evaluation survey with you. So if you can dedicate 2 or 3 minutes to fill it in, then it would help us a lot. So this is everything I want to say. Thank you very much. And I think the first session can begin. Enjoy.
Thank you, Vicky. My name is Henrik PEDERSEN, and I'm the moderator of this first part. I too want to thank for the fantastic videos. They were really enjoyable, and also I learned a lot. And getting much deeper into the claims about the necessity of linking SSH to STEM. We're talking about the very deep co-creation, and I think we need it in order to meet, for instance, the great challenge of the renewable energies we have to introduce without losing the support of the public. So thank you very much for that. So I would like to invite Anders MUNK from Aalborg University to give us the perspectives from Aalborg University on the matter.
Thank you very much, Henrik. I'll just share my screen.
You got 10 minutes. Remember that, please.
Yes, I will be brief. And of course, this is a summary of the video. I hope you can all see my screen. Yes, great. So, hello everybody, my name is Anders MUNK. I'm from the University of Aalborg. I'm also the director of a research laboratory called the Techno-Anthropology Lab, where we integrate computer science and social anthropology. So I'm speaking to you here from a position sort of in the middle of the engine room of trying to integrate STEM and SSH perspectives. But I'm also speaking on behalf of a number of colleagues. I'm not sure why the images here are not properly loading, but I've been interviewing interesting people from my university who are all in the same situation as me. Rege is heading one of our internally funded crossover projects that integrates STEM and SSH in city development together with citizens. Adrienne is on another of these projects, working with, she's an anthropologist working with cryptographers to figure out the future of data privacy and data security. Brian Mathisen is in engineering, but he runs a lab that integrates perspectives from economics and political science in order to come up with feasible proposals for future green energy solutions. And Rolf is currently putting together some projects on the future of data and democracy. Right, so in the video, you will see all these people contributing their thoughts and ideas, and here I will just try to summarize it. So I asked them 3 questions, the first being, why do you think STEM SSH integration is important? Then I asked them to exemplify that in their own work. And finally, I asked them to reflect on what they thought might be the barriers to funding these projects, and of course also what they think are the current successes. And if I just want to start with the first question on why STEM SSH integration is important, and I think generally there are two kinds of answers to this. There is the sort of the traditional answer, and then there is the answer that people at my university, at least, who are in this field, are increasingly giving instead. So the traditional answer goes something along the lines that when we address complex problems in research, we have to deal with the fact that research disciplines or scientific disciplines are specialized by necessity, and hence they only deal with a fraction of the problem. And if you want to complete the picture, so to speak, you need to involve different disciplines in your research projects. That used to be the justification, but the real energy, at least with the people I'm talking to, lies in a different version, which is talks about the social relevance of research. How can you make sure that STEM innovations are also of use and aligned with the values in society? This is what really drives, this is my feeling, at least in our university, current efforts to integrate STEM and SSH. And this could be maybe thought of in a, at least that's what we propose in the video, thinking about this with a model that Science and Technology Studies has been working on since the 80s, where you could say that there was a first sort of a fetal role to play for SSH in making STEM socially relevant. And so this comes down to, once you have a STEM innovation of some sort, you have to make sure that citizens and users can see the point of that innovation in their own everyday lives. And this is where SSH then comes into the picture, sort of very downstream. Then there is a movement into what we call the public debate model, where it's not just a matter of making STEM innovations palatable or digestible to users, but it's actually about facilitating a debate about how we want to use this technology once it has been developed. We still see quite a lot of that, and in my lab, for example, some of the screenshots here on the left come from my laboratory, where we work with what we call controversy mapping. So when we have a new vaccine or a new wind turbine project, or some new gene technology, or what it might be, we are often involved in those kind of projects to map how citizens respond and debate those innovations, and that you could think of as a version of the public debate model. But increasingly, because so many decisions have already been taken, if you only ask users or citizens to debate once the innovation is done, we are moving into a co-creation paradigm. So there's an increasing recognition that in order to really have that discussion at a time where it's actually possible to make changes, you need to integrate STEM and SSH much further upstream. So this is what we call the co-creation model, where we enable whoever might be relevant social groups to have a say in what kind of science and technology should be developed and how it should be taken into account in that process. So one of the other things we do in my lab is we invite users into to the construction of these mapping projects and ask them, so if you were gonna map the disagreements on a new vaccine, how should that project unfold? And you could say, well, that's a more upstream way of engaging people, but we see this across the board with STEM projects, for example, with cryptography, where the anthropologists are now involved on early on in the process of developing new algorithms, which creates a whole different and interesting potential for innovation. And this also, we think, challenges or changes the way that SSH might think of itself in these projects. So to be a little bit cheeky, and I can say this because I come myself from the humanities, but we have probably had a tendency to think of ourselves as sort of, comfortably critiquing STEM research at a distance, right? Let's not get our hands dirty. We will just look at whatever the engineers and technologists come up with, and then we will have sort of, high-flying critical ideas about what this might do for society. We'll try to raise a debate, and then we will sort of hope for that having an effect. And that is increasingly being replaced by critique in proximity to those STEM practices. So it's increasingly seen as much more interesting and also much more rewarding for SSH researchers to actually get their hands dirty with technology development, which enables them to have a real influence on how technology development happens, but it also commits them to some of the constraints of what is technically possible, and hence it makes the critique more interesting, but also more it's easier to implement it. So Brian, for example, in the video talks about how when he proposes new energy solutions, it's important to have thought through the economics and the political barriers to implementation, because if you don't do that already in the development phase, you will come up with proposals that are might be technologically interesting, but they're not. You can't implement. So it's not really a way to make change. In my lab, we have computer scientists working alongside anthropologists, because we know that if we were just using the finished tools to do big data analysis, we would be dependent on choices that had already been made, and so we would much rather get our own hands dirty with coding and trying to do tool development. So you actually now have a pretty integrated mix of computer scientists who have learned to think like anthropologists and anthropologists who have started to code in Python, and this creates a whole different way in which SSH is able to provide critical perspective. So just to end off, you can hear here that we see a combination of co-creation and critical proximity as the goal in terms of widening the spectrum across which SSH STEM integration can happen, and also in terms of ensuring that we can integrate as early on in the process as possible. But then there are some barriers here that are necessary to take into account when we discuss how to effectively fund this. So especially from when you look at, we talked to Brian, for example, from an engineering perspective, there are still a lot of funds that have a pretty applied product-oriented focus. And he sees a need here to have a longer strategic perspective in order to give room to this kind of research, because what often happens is that you realize while integrating that you could do new and interesting things, and so you can't maybe do what you promised, but you have to have a room to think more strategically and long-term. Almost all of the people I talked to mentioned the fact that funds still view either STEM or SSH as playing the main role, and then the other being assistant to that role. So for example, it might be a fund that is funding SSH research, but then you can get help from STEM, or it's a fund that funds STEM research, but then you can have SSH sprinkled to make it look ethical. That's still something we see quite a lot of, and that doesn't really foster true co-creation. And we still see many researchers being socialized into the academic silos. So we need environments where people actually work together on a daily basis in order to break that culturation. And then maybe the overarching challenge is that if we have this critical proximity approach, it means that the real potential lies in discovering completely new research ideas that we could not have imagined before we started. And that creates something fundamentally challenging for most funding proposals, where you have to sort of say upfront, this is what we're gonna solve. This is a problem we're gonna solve. And actually we do know that when we have STEM and SSH working practically together, they revise their views on what could be the interesting problems to solve quite dramatically in the process. Okay, so that was all from me. I hope I stuck to time, more or less. So I will stop my screen sharing now and say thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anders. That was very nice summing up of your video. So now we open for questions, but before we move into that, I would like to ask Wendy if it's okay that I put in Iago OTERO before you, because he has to leave earlier. Okay.
Perfect, no problem, of course.
Thank you, Wendy. So Iago, you prepare yourself for that. Thank you. Good. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. Who is looking after the hands? Is that me? Or is it you, Vicky?
No, sorry, it will be Indra who will assist you, but we are also monitoring, and we will allow the speakers to talk if they raise their hand, so don't worry.
Okay. I don't see any hands in my list here.
So our participants are maybe saving their questions for the second part.
Okay, I have a question, a short question, Anders. You talk about the necessity to get the social science, humanities in very early on to actually find out whether what they have done is aligned with values of society. Surely the politicians would need that very much too. I mean, if you don't want to have diesel cars or petrol cars, you risk having people running around in the streets in yellow vests if you move too fast. So I mean, you should have some support from politicians in your wish.
Yes.
Okay.
But I also think there are two versions of, at least two versions of that integration. So there's some SSH researchers who see themselves as being the ones who are going to vet, ethicists, for example, who might have opinions about this. Mm-hmm. And then there are others, sociologists or anthropologists, who will see their role more as sort of making sure that the right groups of people are heard. So in a more of a facilitating role. And yeah, so it's not necessarily about sort of soliciting to SSH to say whether this is good or bad, but rather it could also just be about integrating SSH with the purpose of making sure that the right stakeholders are heard or taken into account. I think that's true.
Thank you. David?
Thank you very much, Henrik and Anders. Thank you again for the comprehensive presentation summarizing your video. Looking to your video and also I think the other videos, the impression arises that linking SSH with STEM in trans and interdisciplinary research involves quite high transaction costs in getting to know each other, creating a common understanding. I think colleague Morgenstern also referred to transformation of research cultures and those kind of things. So my question is the following: to what degree do you experience problems when seeking funding in getting such increased transaction costs covered by research funders? And do you have a tip to us on what we could tell them on how to make these costs better eligible and covered? Thank you.
Yeah, so first of all, I think we as being the people talking in the video, but also broader probably, has very different opinions about this question. From my perspective, and I think also from Brian Vad's perspective, there is one approach, which is, because of the transaction costs, the good solution is to run very integrated research groups. This is what I do, and this is what Brian does as well. If you do that, then of course the transaction costs lower over time, because you develop a good community. But there is then the challenge with funding is that many funders still want a clearly siloed. They want helpless humanists who need competent data scientists to fix their problem, or they want sort of ethically clueless engineers who need a philosopher to tell them what to do. And of course that's great if you are, then you can, if you really happen to be that siloed, then you can write that proposal. But for those of us who are already trying to integrate on a day-to-day basis, it actually becomes hard for us to show where we are clueless or and I think then the opposite would apply if you were in the other, and many people are still in that sort of more siloed way of working. I'm not sure that's useful, but I think that that is a difference you'd have to take into account.
Okay, I think we have to move on then. And Iago, OTERO, are you ready to start your presentation, please?
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I will now share my screen. I hope it works. Can you see? Yeah?
Yes, it's fine.
So good morning, dear colleagues. I will briefly present the experience of our university with interdisciplinarity, and then suggest some potential ways to improve funding programs according to our experience. I am Iago, OTERO, the coordinator of the Interdisciplinary Center for Mountain Research of the University of Lausanne. And this presentation has been prepared with Professor BC, who is the Vice Rector for Research and International Relations. So our university, UNIL, the University of Lausanne, is a specialized university focusing on human and social sciences, life and medical sciences, as well as environmental sciences. It is organized in 7 different faculties, which you can see here, which in turn are further divided into departments, institutes, and sections. Therefore, it has a disciplinary organization, okay? Regarding funding, most of the funding of our university comes from the state. You have funding from our own region, funding from other Swiss regions, as well as from the Confederation. So this state funding is 80% of our budget, and most of it, about 70% of this state funding, goes directly to faculties, which allows, for example, professors and researchers to have PhD positions and postdoctoral researchers, which are mostly dedicated to disciplinary research. Okay, so professors don't have to compete to get external funding, even if this is encouraged. Okay, external funding mostly comes from the Swiss Science Foundation and the European Union, and altogether this accounts for 8% of the budget. The Swiss National Science Foundation is also mostly organized in a disciplinary way. You have these 3 disciplinary divisions where project applications are organized in or submitted. But then there is a 4th division which deals with programs, where you have special programs like, for example, Synergia, which is explicitly dedicated to inter and transdisciplinary research. And then there is Research for Development, which is a research program on global issues, which has also a part on interdisciplinarity. For you to get an idea, the budget allocated in 2019 had 9% of the total budget dedicated to interdisciplinary Synergia projects. But since 2 years now, our university, the rectorate, has decided to promote interdisciplinarity by creating 5 interfaculty centers focusing on different strategic topics that are like bridges. One is mountain, the other is sustainability, the other is sports, another one on ethics, and another one on life courses. And these centers are running for a pilot phase of 4 years, after which they're going to be evaluated. In the meantime, the rectorate would like to attract researchers to these centers and to motivate them to compete for external funding. One of these centers is the Interdisciplinary Center for Mountain Research, which I am coordinating. And this center has a budget of about $500,000 Swiss francs per year. Our center has 86 researchers from 5 different faculties affiliated, as well as 16 partner institutions, which can both participate in the assembly of the center. Then there is a board that makes the strategic decisions, which are later on implemented by an operational staff. We work on different kind of research projects and outreach activities, which interact with each other. And all these we developed in two different study regions in the Swiss Alps, which are like sustainability laboratories for us. Our activities can be summarized in 3 main pillars. The first one being research, which we promote through calls for postdoctoral projects. We've had 5 so far. Then we have a seed funding program, which supports about 4 pilot interdisciplinary projects per year. And then we have different activities like seminars and networks. Can you still hear me and see the presentation?
We cannot see the presentation.
Okay, it just went off for some strange reason.
Yeah.
I will share it again.
Fine. Can you see it?
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, so 3 main pillars of our activities, one being research, I think this you could see. The other one being interdisciplinarity, which is of course overlapping with research, but it stands as a pillar on its own because we really want to promote inter and transdisciplinarity. To do this, we organize workshops to facilitate exchange between our postdocs, exchange between our seed projects, as well as different workshops to discuss about interdisciplinarity and to assess our own progress in this direction. And finally, we have communication activities. We communicate our research results with the conference series, other types of events, a newsletter, etc. All these to create a local network with our partners in our study regions of people and institutions interested in the sustainability of mountain regions. And next, I'm going to focus on some of the challenges that we have identified in our self-evaluation and see how they can be related to proposals for a better funding of inter and transdisciplinarity. The symbol of a challenge is the mountain. We are working on mountains and we like challenges. One challenge that we have identified is that inter and transdisciplinarity is perceived as a risk by some of our researchers. Why? Because it takes time, simply because of that. And it means less time for their own discipline, which after all is still the basis for career evaluation, right? For this, we have seen that our seed funding program has been very useful to deal with that challenge because it has allowed researchers to assess the feasibility of their project, their pilot project, and at the same time evaluate the risks that conducting such a project on a bigger scale would have for their careers. But we have also identified a need to develop different ways to evaluate scientific careers so that inter and transdisciplinary experience is more and more valued at the level of the university and of funding programs, for example, and I will come to that in a minute. Another big challenge that we have identified is the big challenge of interdisciplinarity, is how to integrate different points of view, which are scientific and non-scientific alike, into collaborative research that actually contributes to a transformation towards sustainability. For this, we have seen that several methods that are being used by our teams are very useful. For example, having a common research site around which different disciplines and societal stakeholders interact, using project co-design with societal stakeholders and so on, as well as using facilitation techniques. But we have also identified the need to actually provide capacity building to the researchers to develop certain aptitudes that are necessary for this integration to be possible. For example, the ability to listen to and understand each other, which is not automatic, right? And finally, another challenge is that for early stage researchers like postdocs, it is very difficult to apply for external funding to continue their interdisciplinary projects in our own university, because often having a long-term position is a requisite, either implicit or explicit, to get those projects. So to sum up, I come to the end of my presentation. Our university, as many other universities in the world and in Europe, is organized mostly in a disciplinary way, but it is now encouraging interdisciplinarity with the creation of 5 interfaculty centers. In order for these centers to become permanent and to attract researchers that apply for competitive funding, and in order for interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity to be consolidated, we need structural changes at different levels, at the level of the university, but also at the level of funding programs. And here are some proposals that, according to our experience, would be useful for that. For example, a stronger reward of inter and transdisciplinary experience in the evaluation criteria would help. Sufficient funding could be allocated to participatory methods that are very important in projects. It has been mentioned before, but are also very time consuming and resource consuming, right? Projects could be allowed to redefine goals and methods during the course of the project, especially after interacting with societal stakeholders, which often change the goal of the project. Contingency funds would help, for example, to support unplanned ideas and needs that were not foreseen in the project document. Flexibility regarding project delays would be also very appreciated, because often the intense contact with different disciplines and other stakeholders delay the project outputs, right? Incentives for young researchers could be improved. And finally, I think that it would be also very useful to include in the eligible cost the resources necessary for self-evaluation by the project partnership, and to transfer the lessons that have been learned in the project. And with this, I came to the end of my presentation. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Iago. I think that was a very interesting list of suggestions. Any questions? I saw a hand. Jonathan Seckel, you have a question, please?
Yes, thank you, Iago. That was fascinating. One of the problems we found in Edinburgh with trying to do these interfaculty groupings is that the faculties still exist. So how have you addressed the double allegiance to the institute that's trying to do multidisciplinary work, but also back to the single host discipline?
I can answer with a concrete example, is the way we manage the work of our 4 postdoctoral researchers, where by contract we specify that a certain amount of their time, 10% of their time, should be dedicated to interdisciplinary activities, interfaculty activities by contract. And the rest could be dedicated to their project, which is mostly disciplinary and is mostly related to a certain faculties or research institutes. That was one.
10% enough to allow them to really deal with the complexities of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary working?
Well, it's definitely not a big share of work, but there we had to combine two things. Postdocs are in a moment of their career in which they need to consolidate a strong presence in a certain community of expertise. You can call it a discipline if you want. So this is important for them to actually strive in the current research landscape, right? But at the same time, we wanted them to have this added value of interdisciplinary experience. And this was kind of the balance we kind of arrived to. And it led to interesting collaborations between the postdocs who then later on submitted a project together. And so we are quite satisfied with that. But definitely this is always a challenge that needs to be tackled. I agree, yeah.
Thank you very much. Other questions?
Henrik, we have two questions in the chat box. So the first one is from Noel Climat to Iago, with a question around what sort of seed funding is precisely is for those 4-year projects. Who is it for? How long? What criteria for interdisciplinarity are used to evaluate them? So maybe Iago, you would like to address it, and it's followed by a question from Arthur Schmidt. So maybe Iago, you could answer those two. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. These seed funding projects are actually yearly projects, and we fund 4 or 5 projects per year. Maybe here there was a misunderstanding with my presentation. So we fund 4 or 5 projects per year. These are projects that run for 1 year. The beneficiaries of these projects are the members of our center, as well as the partner institutions that can also participate. And these projects are intended to fund the preparation or the feasibility study of bigger projects, of inter and transdisciplinary projects. So typically under this scheme, there is a team of people that comes together, and during 1 year, it hires someone or it makes some workshops of discussion to see how feasible developing a big inter and transdisciplinary project would be. So it's like to test a pilot idea, to develop a feasibility study for inter and transdisciplinary projects. And so far we have been quite not very strict with criteria on interdisciplinarity, but we have actually allowed different definitions of interdisciplinarity within the natural sciences, within the social sciences, or across both to be eligible for funding. The idea of this project is that later on, there is a big funding application that goes on and that is successful.
Iago, thank you very much. There's another question by Arthur Schmidt, that when you do interdisciplinary research, you tend to get a long list of authors, co-authors, which are being penalized in SSH. I was not aware of that, but do you see changes with respect to this problem?
Okay, it's a question about publication and researchers in science and social science and humanities being penalized for being part of long list of authors in publications, right?
That's the question, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't encountered this problem myself, and I'm not aware that any of our researchers has had this problem. It is true though that normally science and social science and the humanities authors publish mostly single authored papers, so it's not as common as in natural sciences, for example. But we have not had this problem, or at least I'm not aware that this is a problem in our case.
Aliyah seems to have a suggestion here. They need to be first authors, she says.
Okay, good. It's good to know this point. Thank you very much.
Yes, okay. Thank you. I am grateful for your presentation here. I am afraid we have to move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So now we go back to Wendy SONNEVELD from Ghent University, please.
Yes, thank you. Henrik, do you see the presentation now?
Yes, clearly you need to put it in presentation mode, but
I am on the way.
Okay.
Now it's okay.
Yes.
So my presentation is about strengthening interdisciplinarity in Horizon Europe. First, a little bit, some words about my role. So my name is Wendy SONNEVELD. I have a background in French linguistics and literature and European studies and European politics that I studied in Geneva outside the European Union. It was very interesting. At the start of FP7, the 7th Framework Program, I started to work for a Dutch STEM-focused applied scientific research organization. And at the start of Horizon 2020, I started to work for Ghent University. And in my European public affairs role here in the research department of Ghent University, I provide intelligence and perform networking and lobbying tasks regarding European research and innovation policy. Of course, I don't do that on my own. I do that together with some colleagues, or a lot of colleagues. One of the groups of colleagues that I work very intensively together with are the IDC. IDC stands for Interdisciplinary Research Consortia. They are aimed at realizing societal impact. In 2013, these 5 of them started as SSH focused, interdisciplinary and cross-faculty consortia. Some were later on, 4 of them became IDC. And in 2020, so this year, we added 6 of them, making 10. And you see the logos of the first 4 IDC in your screen. The others are still under development. Some characteristics about this IDC is that they are funded through our own university's special research fund. They focus on societal impacts, and interdisciplinarity is in the core, at the core of this IDC initiative. With their focus on societal impacts, they form a natural counterpart to the business development centers that focus on economic impact. Interdisciplinarity means that we try to strengthen collaboration both within SSH, within STEM, but also between SSH and STEM. Transdisciplinarity is also encouraged and co-creation with non-academic stakeholders as well. Each IDC has a spokesperson, and each IDC has also a coordinator, a research coordinator. That research coordinator acts as a knowledge broker, and these knowledge brokers work together with us in the research department on European public affairs. For those who are interested, these IDC coordinators have a specific career model, and you find the link below on the screen. What did we do together, the EU office in the research department of Ghent University and these IDC working on European public affairs? Well, very short, we published 2 position papers. The first one has been published in 2017 to influence the Horizon 2020 Interim Evaluation. That was with a focus on SSH. And 1 year later, we published a call on the European Union with a focus on interdisciplinarity. And that call has been supported by CESAER with a side letter. This call to strengthen interdisciplinarity in Horizon Europe was not picked up very well by the European Commission in the proposal for the Horizon Europe legislation. Into our perspective, interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity was not integrated in a satisfactory way. However, when we started to draft amendments together with a lot of others, amendments on this proposal of the European Commission for Horizon Europe, and we did share them with the Council, with the Member States, and with the European Parliament, they were picked up. They were picked up by a lot of other people, and we ended what we asked for in these amendments based on this second position paper was more interdisciplinarity in the clusters, but what we got that, and we got even more. We obtained that interdisciplinarity is now, or will become, one of the core principles of the new program of Horizon Europe. Interdisciplinarity is mentioned in Article 6 of Horizon Europe. So what is key to understand here is that interdisciplinarity is not in the core principles of the new program of Horizon Europe, thanks to DGRTD. It's thanks to the member states and thanks to the European Parliament that interdisciplinarity is in the program. This probably explains why we do not see a lot moving at the European Commission nowadays. At least we are not aware of it. That might be us, but we are not aware of the European Commission developing extra supporting measures to strengthen interdisciplinarity. And therefore, we are very grateful for this workshop. It comes very timely, right before the start of the program implementation. I'd like to share with you, before we create misunderstandings, what is at the core of the Ghent University's vision is that interdisciplinarity can only happen if SSH researchers are informed equally as their STEM colleagues on Horizon Europe, on how it works, on how that they have the same communication channels to influence the work programs, for example. And that is something that we see is a real problem. But before we have we formulate some recommendations, please have a quick look together with us at what we have been realizing until now. As you can see on this slide, we did a recommendation, we formulated a recommendation to focus the Horizon 2020 Societal Challenge 6, so the SSH budget, on SSH. And your question might be, well, that's normal, it should be that case. Well, should be there. Well, it's not. Cost is financed partly by the SSH Societal Challenge 6 budget. It receives half of its budget from SSH. Don't understand us wrong. Don't get this wrong. We love, here in Ghent, we love coast actions, we love coast association, but we simply do not understand why these projects that sometimes do not have anything to do with SSH is financed by the SSH Societal Challenge 6. So what we've been doing is when we received a working visit of some Flemish MEPs, Flemish people of the European Parliament in the frame of the Horizon 2020 Interim Evaluation with DGRTD in the room, we asked that question, and now we realized that this question might have the consequence, or will have the consequence, that the cluster budget for SSH in Horizon Europe will be doubled, since cost will get paid fully out of the widening part. Another recommendation that we made is to broaden the range of SSH disciplines in Horizon Europe to compare to Horizon 2020. We were not the only ones asking for this. The creative industries lobby was much more efficient than we are, luckily. And now we see in Horizon Europe that the introduction of a culture and creativity aspects within the Horizon Europe SSH cluster. But just to remind that we also asked for this, but others, by working all together, others translated it into real life. Another, and that's the last recommendation that I will talk about here before we go to the ambitions we have, is we made a recommendation on societal impact. We asked the European Parliament and the member states to take societal impact into account. And now you will see in Horizon Europe that societal impact, there is a key impact pathway indicator that is added on societal impact next to the existing, in Horizon 2020, existing ones on scientific impact and technological/economic impact. But let's focus on our ambition. This is, so we would like to make sure that SSH researchers are informed equally on Horizon Europe as their STEM colleagues, and they have the same communication lines. As you can see in this picture, we think that that's not the case. DGRTD structurally cooperates with researchers before they start to draft the Horizon 2020 work programs, except for SSH researchers. So the next question then is, when DGRTD drafts the Horizon 2020 or later on Horizon Europe work programs, and when they also draft the SSH flagged parts of the STEM focused call texts, where does DGRTD get their inspiration from if they do not work together in a structural way with SSH researchers? As we understand it here in Ghent, DGRTD receives, of course, the help of the member states, and they have what they call an SSH contact points network within the European Commission. This is a network of, as we understand, we might be wrong, but looking forward to have more information on it, but we know that most of these people are STEM educated policy officers that write the SSH flagged parts of the call text. So, of course, they are really making a big effort. The flagging exercise is absolutely better than having nothing. But what is really needed is cooperation with SSH researchers themselves. So this is also something that came back in the presentation from Anders, asking for proximity. This is very much lined up with that idea. This is the situation that we are aiming for. An ETP is a platform that receives a label from the European Commission that is obliged to publish research and innovation agendas from time to time, and these research and innovation agendas form one of the sources of inspiration for the European Commission when they draft work programs. So what we aim for is an ETP-inspired SSH platform to make it possible for the SSH researchers to use this structural communication line with the European Commission. This is not about creating another silo approach. Nowadays, already it is possible for SSH researchers to participate in these ETPs for STEM people focused on STEM research, but it doesn't. It's not very effective in the way we experience it. And one of the main reasons for that, into our perspective, is that the SSH people just do not really, or a lot of them are not familiar or as familiar as STEM colleagues with Horizon and the Horizon language. So therefore, into our perspective, this extra effort should be made. What we ask for is some seed money. Seed money for the development of a business plan for a financial sustainable ETP-like SSH platform that should definitely strengthen interdisciplinarity. That should be at the core of this platform. And we think a tender procedure under Horizon Europe might be a good way to do that. We have some other ambitions, but this is the main one for the moment I will talk about. Just one last aspect that I'd like to share with you is that the OECD published a Beyond Growth report. And in that report, they recommend to link different SDGs before tackling SDGs. DGRTD indicated to us in different meetings, in an ICLO meeting, for example, that they will integrate this recommendation into Horizon Europe, at least into the strategic plan. We from Ghent University asked the European Commission already how they envisaged to do that without developing supporting measures to strengthen interdisciplinarity in Horizon Europe. In other words, our suggestion here is to turn interdisciplinarity into a political dossier. We don't see how the Green Deal could be realized seen from the RNI perspective without strengthening interdisciplinarity. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Wendy, for some very clear suggestions about seed money, but also early creation. We are running a bit late, but of course we have time for questions. Could you lower your presentation, please?
Yes.
Any people raising hands?
We have a question from Noel Klima to Wendy, CESAER and UNICA. Maybe Noel could introduce the question.
Noel?
Otherwise, I can read it out. So another small step towards the STEM SSH linking. shouldn't SSH researchers be more involved in the evaluation of STEM project proposals with embedded SSH activities in Horizon Europe is the question. It's directed to Wendy. I have some ideas about that. I think I'm also addressed in the question, and most likely our colleagues from UNICA as well. So Wendy, please.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Noel. Yes, of course, we think that there is a big issue with in the evaluation process. The European Commission is aware of that, as far as we understand, but as far as we understand as well, there is no easy solution. Instead of going forward with SSH evaluators to be added to the panels, the European Commission, the unit E4, if I'm not mistaken, is reflecting on introducing interdisciplinarity panels, or no, sorry, I said it wrong, interdisciplinarity experts, and create a platform for them. And from that platform, they can be asked to help the Commission evaluate Horizon Europe proposals. The only thing is that we are now heading towards Horizon Europe. The start of the program will be in the coming months. We do not have any information about how they will realize that. We just don't see how that will work. Any recommendation that we can make towards the European Commission and towards the right people dealing with interdisciplinarity in DGRTD is very much welcome.
David, you also had an answer to that question?
Thank you very much, Henrik. Very good question, Noel. And I think while we were preparing the recommendations and conclusions coming out of this workshop, where, talking to the colleagues from UNICA and CESAER, we actually identified that we cannot just, sort of summarize some challenges and then make concrete proposals to funding agencies in general and the Commission in particular, but that we needed particular attention to evaluations, to reviewers themselves, as well as the guidelines these people receive. I think it has been described very well through the various presentations so far that there is a stream of disciplinary evaluation, which is often very much also linked to assessment and rewarding of researchers' careers by the universities involved, and that there is a track on inter and transdisciplinarity, and the percentages we have seen them. So very clearly there's a challenge to address that. As Wendy said, we are trying to formulate these things. I will intervene in a second as a panelist, where I will actually go beyond just the idea of having interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary experts, or let's say mixed panels, but also to introduce maybe another dimension of the evaluations along the idea of increasing the societal impact. So to move to implementation, concrete solutions to big challenges. So I'll follow up with that, but we are very aware of this and we'll address it in the open letter. And as Wendy said, most likely we'll come back to the participants, and we are very much looking forward to getting your ideas as well.
Thank you, David. Lucian, would you like to add something to this?
Yes, no, I think I agree. Thank you very much. It's a very important point. So we will debate it in UNICA as well. We have a group of vice rector research in UNICA and also heads of international office and research offices. So I think this is something that we really will take into high consideration.
Thank you. And now, Aliyah, I'm sorry to have you waiting. Please show your presentation.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, we see it. Thank you.
Okay, everything okay? You will see the presentation, right?
Perfect, perfect. Yeah.
So hello everyone, my name is Aliyah Morgenstern and I'm a linguistics professor at Sorbonne Nouvelle University in Paris, which is an entirely SSH university, reshaped into 3 faculties presented in the slide. So I was hired by the English Studies Department and specialize in child language development and in multimodal interactions using ecological data. So very often family data. Very few colleagues in my university have experience in integrating SSH with other scientific fields into their projects outside digitalizing humanities. So I couldn't really make an overview, and I just based this presentation on my personal experience through my own projects. But I could also answer questions about my experience as a reviewer for ERC for a long time, and half a dozen other European and international agencies. So the workshop aims at integrating SSH research in STEM-led projects, but as a specialist in SSH, I will talk about integrating STEM and other scientific fields into SSH projects. And the target process is probably a continuous back and forth integrative movement until we reach full inter and transdisciplinarity through our daily scientific interactions. So why did I get involved in inter and transdisciplinary research? Just to give the example of one of the topics I work on, child language development, to really capture how children master language or not, we need not only to do collective work with different specialists within linguistics, but also collaborate with all the fields in the slide and probably much more. So those are just the ones that I've been involved with. So I will give a few examples, 3 examples of how I got involved in trying to get funding. Let's start with topic 1, family dinners. How does interdisciplinarity come in? By observing family life, we got involved in the discourse about health issues during the dining process, and in overweight and obesity in particular. We thought our methods could be useful to other scientific fields, especially for children's nutrition. So there, it's not exactly STEM, but we did use STEM methods. So I reached out to several colleagues and worked on an ERC synergy grant in 2011. We had linguistics, anthropology, computer science, pediatrics, all integrated into one project. The research was to highlight differences in conversation and eating practices between families in Sweden, France, between families with children in different age groups, and those with and without a weight problem. We wanted to offer insights not commonly available to medical teams treating children with weight problems, hopefully resulting in effective solutions. So the first time we applied, we got an A. We were ranked 8th project out of the few hundred, but the panel interviewed 7 teams, so we did not go to the interview, and 2 projects got financed in that panel. And then we received such excellent evaluations that it was difficult to improve the project, as we did as much as possible, as much as we could tell. But the second round, the following year, our results were quite lower with the same projects, but a different panel, different reviewers, since they changed 1 year out of 2. And so we dropped it. And I continued to work on family dinners, and last year I submitted a project at the national level at the Agence Nationale de la Recherche. The project was called Lang Food, focusing on food and language with nutritionists, anthropologists, and linguists, using methods from computer science. And the reviewers made a lot of positive comments, but in the second round, they criticized us for being too ambitious, too interdisciplinary, and told us to focus on language, which we did, and changed the name to Dean Lang and got funded this year with only linguists in the project. So that's the story of family dinners. Second topic, a multimodal approach to language development. Within my work in language development and socialization, I got more and more interested in gesture, including gaze, postures, facial expressions, as well as the movements of the upper limbs. And I worked more and more with gesture specialists, including computational scientists, and because it is terribly complex to capture how those semiotic resources function together within ecological data. So we all know the limitations of collecting, transcribing, and annotating spontaneous data. It's time-consuming, extremely expensive, and messy. So I thought one might try to combine spontaneous data analysis with mixed model statistics and modeling. Machine learning techniques could be applied to a large collection of multimodal analysis of developmental data. Natural interaction in human beings include a very large number of context dependencies, situation, interlocutors, mood, cognitive load, individual differences, and by feeding the model with analysis of multiple extracts coded for use of modalities in various situations and of different ages, modeling would lead to a better polysemiotic grasp of language development in natural interaction. So I reached out to colleagues from Germany, the Netherlands, and we spent 2 years designing another ERC Synergy Grant proposal. The team evolved as we developed the project, and we added a mathematician who is specialized in robotics. We called it the CAPCOM Consortium, which aimed to combine innovative technology with pioneering theoretical approaches to capture and model how human communication involves subjectivity, how we coordinate our modes of expression, and dynamically attune to each other. This involved also creating avatars, and the aim was also to work with deaf and blind participants. So after spending 15,000 euros, 2 years of work and countless sleepless nights, we got a B with the kind of comments that do not make you want to even improve the proposal. And we had the feeling that we were evaluated by a humanities panel, which we had to choose between humanities and other panels, STEM panels, and that the humanities panel did not understand the implications of the work on avatars, for example, that we were proposing. But I'm not saying that it was unjustly evaluated. I'm sure it had flaws. I just think that some of the comments showed that there wasn't a real grasp of what we were proposing to do. So third topic, I downscaled my interdisciplinary ambitions, or at least the size of the team. So in attempt 3, this is just a PhD supervision. The thesis project proposes to uncover and clarify the motor coupling relationships between 2 constituent parameters of all sign languages, the parameters of location and of movement. And the data couples video recordings and motion capture. Our hypothesis is that the motor pattern of each sign is as simple as possible to minimize cognitive load and cognitive storage. And the dissertation is supposed to specify how the motor pattern of signs, sign languages, integrate the laws of motion. So this can only work out because Léa, Chèvrefils de Viol, who was at first trained in linguistics, has opened her young brain to biomechanics and computer science and is willing to overcome all possible obstacles. And because my young colleague in biomechanics is willing and patient enough to spend hours with us, video conferencing, because he lives in Rouen and we're in Paris. And because an incredible number of colleagues from all over the world have been answering our queries about MATLAB and algorithms and mocap settings and so on. So out of those 3 this case study of 3 topics, what lessons, what recommendation can be drawn? It's good to try because it is personally enriching. And I must say that as a reviewer myself, I now have more culture to evaluate interdisciplinary projects. So I really could talk about personal enrichment, years spent socializing with other scientific approaches and perspectives. And it was really, really hard at times. I really almost abandoned the submission. The second, the desire to continue to open language study to more and more scientific fields. Third, the understanding that it is not good to submit a project you don't fully understand. And there were aspects of this second synergy proposal that I just couldn't fully grasp. So 4, you need to make sure you socialize even more to the partner's methods, approaches, and tools. And to do that, what I suggest first is to increase SSH funding in general, to improve research in SSH and develop different types of skills such as teamwork, collective work, which is not that common, efficiency, impact of publication. You first need to increase SSH funding in general. SSH should not just be the icing on the cake, but be part of the cake. Second, I really think that this more funding can serve as a springboard, but then number 2, we need to get away from our disciplinary silos. And for that, I would suggest looking at how children and students are educated. I really believe that we need to inject more interdisciplinarity in our education programs in primary school, in high school, and in universities to construct researchers or to build researchers who are sensitive to each other's fields. And then for funding to be interdisciplinary, we need to think about number 3, and we've talked about it already in the other presentations. Interdisciplinary reviewing is really important, and we need to build that. And number 4, we need to find ways to produce interdisciplinary deliverables in interdisciplinary venues, and think of how to publish with an interdisciplinary perspective, because a lot of the researchers involved also need to build their careers. Mine is almost over. I mean, I don't need anything anymore. I have all I need, but my younger colleagues, in order for them to get promoted, they need the publications, they need all that impact for it to work. So thank you very much, and I hope we'll have a fruitful discussion.
Thank you very much, Aliyah.
I'll stop sharing.
For sharing your experience with Synergy grants. I mean, it's very difficult to get a Synergy grant, even in a hardcore mono fields, but you have really been bold in trying. I have one question. Do you support a university education which is interdisciplinary?
Yeah, I absolutely do. In France, things are very monodisciplinary. You have to choose very early in high school if you're going to go towards science, humanities, and even within that, which type. And then unless you do classe préparatoire, which I did, but I did it in SSH, which is 2 years of preparing your entry into grandes écoles, you have one discipline. Even within STEM, you have to choose only math or only physics. I mean, you have, of course, if you do physics, you do a little bit of math.
Yeah, but my question is more whether you are actually teaching in an interdisciplinary program.
Am I what?
Do you have such a program at your university?
We don't have such a program, and I'm very much for it. But there's within the university, it is possible to mix certain fields within the humanities with a little bit of social science. But there's no science, hard science, taught to any of our students.
But it's just, I mean, you meet a lot of conservatism when you submit applications, right? But if you educate candidates, which are very interdisciplinary, you will also meet some conservatism from industry, whether they would employ it. You can ask Anders MUNK about that. It is, they all say, this is the right thing, this is what we need, but they don't employ them. So we are up against a lot of conservatism. Yeah,
there is a lot of conservatism, but I really think that at the same time as you're doing your work to reach interdisciplinary in a short time span, we also have to work for the future. And if we educate the students now to be interdisciplinary, they are going to become reviewers, and they're going to implement the program. So I think we also have to work for the longer time span, longer scale. At the same time.
Okay, there's a hand raised from one of the attendees. I can't see that here. Somebody can see it for me?
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, so my name is Katalin Popa. I am an EU grants advisor for the University of Twente Grants Office. Can say I strongly connect with the last presentation. I have to say that I help a lot of candidates going for ERCs, and one of the first things I do is tell them to drop the interdisciplinarity, because as the ERC panel has the ERC chairs have panel chairs, and other members from ERC have also acknowledged at the European Research and Innovation Days, interdisciplinary projects have a significantly lower chance of going through. And that really kills me, because myself, I also have a background from social sciences and humanities, but worked also in computer science. And it is in the end a question with how do you get to have a pool of evaluators that is able to properly evaluate interdisciplinary project. Indeed, the education that you give except for university colleges, which fortunately there are more and more, which form absolutely interdisciplinary, but except for those, I don't see any other avenue of forming future evaluators that will be able to properly appreciate interdisciplinary projects. So what would be the options there? How do we get to make sure that we do go into that direction in the future and not stay complaining about the same thing 20 years from now? Thank you.
I think you have to do the two at the same time. I mean, you have to train people to be interdisciplinary themselves, but the people who are already strong in one discipline, you have to try to find those who are open to other fields and who are used to reading other types of projects, and put them together. But the problem is how to assess the openness of a reviewer, how to, give them a lot of projects to read. For example, I would have liked to be a little mouse and gone to other panels to see how they worked. I just worked in SH4 and it was already a mixture of neuroscience and philosophy, linguistics, psychology, which is quite broader than others. But it would have been so interesting to spend half a day per panel and see how they were working. This is not done. We're not, and this would be a good training program for interdisciplinary reviewers.
Thank you, Aliyah. I think we need to stop the first part. We are really running late. And I think I need to give the cyberspace over to Jonathan Seckel from Edinburgh University.